As far as I'm concerned, there are 11 different explosions in Minecraft. I think these are all of them, but I haven't bothered to do extensive research. Anyways, we've got the 2 TNTs, End Crystal, dimension-specific stuff, we've got the creepers, we've got gas fireballs, and basically everything associated with the Wither. Now, as seeing you've clicked on this video, we know we're talking about the End Crystal today. But you might actually also know this because I like working with End Crystals. I've designed this End Crystal landmine, as well as this V2 that I've yet to talk about on the channel. Basically, the point I'm making is, I really like End Crystals. The End Crystal has a lot going for it, generally that it just looks really cool, but the 2 technical reasons why I really like them is because number 1, we have a massive explosion, but number 2, it detonates when I throw literally anything at it. Which means even something as simple as using a dispenser to throw a snowball at it will cause it to explode. What this essentially means is that you've got an incredibly powerful explosive that will detonate completely on demand instantaneously. Now unfortunately, End Crystals kind of have a bunch of flaws that really make them terrible for anything that isn't just killing stuff really quickly. So that kind of makes them a terrible candidate for use in something like a tree farm. So today I'm going to be talking about how I used End Crystals in a tree farm. Before we get into the actual how did I build this, the nitty-gritty of the details of the machinery, let's talk about tree farming as a whole. First off, there's about 5 things that are absolutely necessary for any tree farm. And we're going to first start with the necessities for tree growth. We need space to grow, and we also need dirt to plant it on. Next, we need a dispenser for bone meal, otherwise we'll be waiting years for every tree to grow. We need a tree detector, which basically says, okay, there's a tree here, now it's time to move it out of the way. And we need a log destroyer. What happens to those logs after we move them out of the way? They have to be gone at least some way, otherwise they'll eventually back up. And lastly, we need item collection. This just makes sure that we're actually making a profit, so the tree farm is completely worth building. This is a pretty common setup you'll see in some smaller tree farms. As you can see, we have a dispenser that's capable of dispensing bone meal, we have a piston that moves it in some other direction so that it can be destroyed, and lastly the log detector actually pulls comparator output from this dispenser only when there's a log to pull it through. As you can see right here, we can start to see the output of this bone meal from the dispenser, and this tells us that there's a tree grown instead of just a sapling. I'm sure it's fairly obvious that tree farming has a lot more nuance to it, and there's definitely some things that you'll also commonly see, like leaf crushers and sapling suppliers, but it's generally these 5 principles that every single tree farm is going to be needing to use. Alright, so now let's get into farm design. First off, we've got this layout here. We've got dirt in the center, we've got a dispenser here, and a comparator right here. This is our bone meal and block detection covered. We're actually going to have the player standing underneath the farm, and they can place End Crystals on the underside of obsidian for some reason, which allows the system to actually work. We're also going to be placing the saplings from the underside, and I'll talk about how that works in a brief moment. 2 things to note. End Crystals are really cool in that when they're placed in obsidian, they only break the blocks that are above the top of the obsidian. Meaning that it won't damage all the important hoppers here, but it'll absolutely break all the tree blocks that are right here. That's why it's super important that we push up this stickied dirt block so that it moves the logs up to the same level as the End Crystals so they can be blown up properly. The reason why this system actually works is because, although an End Crystal looks like it's kind of floating above the obsidian right here, its center of explosion is here where this red concrete is. And the way explosions work is that it casts rays, lines out from the center of this block in every direction it can access, but it actually can't access any blocks below the level of the obsidian because it simply cannot create a ray that intersects with the block that doesn't immediately run into the obsidian and get destroyed due to obsidian being blast-proof. This is also exactly why we put the obsidian 2 blocks away from the center of the tree, because if we place it here, the wide hitbox of the End Crystal actually gets carried upwards due to these log blocks all moving up. This brings us into this situation where the End Crystal is 1 block higher, and it has no problem casting a ray from the center of its explosive point to the important componentry that's on either side of the obsidian block. Another important reason why we put the obsidian block 2 blocks away from the dirt is that since leaves can generate in all of these possible locations for oak trees, it actually blocks our line of sight with the dispenser that's going to be throwing a snowball at the End Crystal to detonate it. However, If it's off to the side like this, there's actually 3 blocks here where the hitbox pokes out enough for us to safely detonate it without ever the dispenser being blocked by the leaves. Lastly, you may have noticed this cauldron right here, and this actually plays a major role in getting the sapling onto the dirt. You see, the problem with this is that I'm going to be way under here, which means that placing a sapling directly on the block is going to be virtually impossible. The only way I can pull this off is by aiming at a block that is kind of like this, and then placing it. But this is a problem, because having this particular setup leaves a large open hole for items to fall through. And if an item occupies my hand slot, like this green cyan gas, and there's an end crystal on the ground that I need to pick up, it'll go back into my inventory, which is hugely problematic for me to continue to use the farm. So, the solution was to use this cauldron, because it'll be difficult to see here, but what I can actually do is stand underneath here and click on one of the legs of the cauldron, and that places a sapling. If I show a little diagram here we have our cauldron on our dirt block, and what I'm doing is I'm standing way under here, and I'm aiming at this exact leg, the one covered with buttons. Clicking here is fundamentally the same as clicking on this side, which very clearly relocates the sapling over to the dirt block. As you can see, if I place the sapling on the side of the cauldron, it places on the dirt, but if I look under and specifically aim at this leg right here, it also does it. This is how we can essentially allow ourselves to place this sapling while never creating a hole large enough for an item to accidentally drop in and occupy my hand slot. So now let's talk about how the system works as a whole. The player is going to create one loop every time we detonate a tree. First thing that's going to happen is the player is going to rise up through this bubble column and grab this end crystal into its main hand. It's going to then place it on this obsidian right here, like so, and that creates our explosive. The next thing that's going to happen is the player is going to roll up to this iron trapdoor and end up right here. They're going to have a bunch of saplings in their offhand, and what's going to happen next is they're going to place it on the cauldron leg, as I saw before, and then they're going to drop down via trapdoor. What actually triggers the dropping down is the moment this tree grows, because of this clock that is going to be put on, dispensing bone meal, it's actually going to drop the player down, so that when we detonate this end crystal, it doesn't hurt the player. It's also going to do all the piston stuff involved in moving the tree up and detonating everything properly, and eventually what's going to happen is this. So now we're actually going to run a 10-minute test of the system so we can talk about how fast it actually is compared to... Whoops. What happened? Damn, what a disaster. Anyways, we've still got data to collect, so let's check out what actually happened. We have 10 saplings and 8 logs. I went ahead and actually counted how many trees blew up, both including the ones that I showed to you and ones that I didn't, a couple beforehand. That was 18 trees. You might have a couple of questions. First off, why the hell did it jam? I will explain that in a moment. But what I will talk about now is why we got such an absurd sapling deficit of 10 saplings, as well as less than half a log per tree. Yet, it's not just the really rancid item collection system that's at play here. There's actually another factor that is causing us to have really awful rates, and it comes in the form of a often overlooked fact about TNT that we just take for granted, and I can show that to you in this little experiment. If I go ahead and blow up 2 equally sized, equal blast resistant blocks of dirt, we can see that we get this size explosion with TNT, and this size explosion with end crystals. The end crystal clearly wins out in explosion size, it's much more powerful. But if we actually take into the actual items we're getting, we received almost 100 dirt blocks here, and only 33 coarse dirt from the end crystal. So why is it that we destroyed so many more blocks with the end crystal, yet got so many more blocks from the TNT? And that's due to a fact called blast efficiency. TNT has a really nice fact about it, that it actually gives you 100% of the blocks that it destroys. We can be certain that we deleted exactly 98 blocks right here when this explosion happened. We got all 98 of them back. Yet, end crystals are a lot less forgiving. With end crystals, we get 1/6 of the blocks, or 17%. I can be pretty certain that right here, we actually probably got 180 of the blocks to be deleted, but we only received 30 of them in return. I'm actually not going to get into too much detail about why the thing actually jammed, because it's pretty simple. Sometimes you get big trees like this, and then the logs can start to pile up, which eventually makes this piston reach its push limit, which results in some jamming occurring. I could very easily prevent this by introducing a blast-proof height limiter, but I actually didn't do this because I forgot. Anyways, that's just about the end of it. The one thing that we did learn is that we should definitely not use end crystals for things like tree farming. I'm probably not going to be releasing the schematic for this project because putting this into the technical community would be like dumping mud in an Olympic swimming pool. It's just such a garbage design. I don't want it going into the hands of anybody that is actually going to use it for a real purpose. It's also kind of like an obligation of mine to fix all the problems that occur within a machine, such as the hopper problem, the height restriction problem, before I release it to the general public, which I kind of don't want to do. Anyways, if you like the kind of work I do and the videos and the stuff that I talk about, make sure to like and subscribe. Check out my other content. I've got a whole bunch of other cool stuff on the channel, and I'll see you next time.